welcome everybody. If you are just joining us, we're just waiting as people are bouncing in. So welcome to tonight's Adoption Week Scotland webinar. We are focusing on education tonight with Gerry Diamond, and we will be looking at navigating the school environment with trauma and ACEs. We've got quite a lot of people joining us tonight. We've got about 300 people who have booked to come and join us, so we're just waiting for a few more people to bounce through the gates, as it were. You can see all the numbers rising. And just maybe while you're waiting, just a wee reminder that tonight's session is set up as a webinar. So if you're sitting in your pajamas, which is probably what I would be doing if I were in your shoes, then nobody can see you. So fantastic. You don't have control of your microphone or your camera. You are safe wherever you happen to be watching this from. So again, if you've just joined us, welcome to tonight's Adoption Week Scotland webinar, focusing on education with Gerry Diamond and looking at navigating the school environment with trauma and ACEs. This is set up as a webinar, and that means we can't see or hear you. You do not have control of your camera or your microphone. If you'd like to ask a question at any point this evening, you can pop that into the Q&A, which you should be able to see on your screen somewhere. And we will aim to make time for these at the end of Gerry's talk. If we don't manage to get through all the questions that you have tonight, then we will collate them and we will try to get some kind of response to you over the next week or so. Again, because it's a webinar, obviously you're not able to kind of jump in and join the discussion verbally, but there is a wee range of functions at the bottom of your screen if you want to react to anything that's said during the evening, and we would very much appreciate your thoughts and comments in the chat, so feel free just to pop them in there. There's myself and my colleague Simon, who is currently behind the scenes at the moment, and we will try and jump in and respond to things in the chat too as we go through the night. We are recording the session, so if you do happen to miss anything, then we will there will be a chance for you to catch up. We've got this great mix of people tonight. We've got a huge number of people joining us, so as I said, up to about 300 people, so it's a fantastic opportunity to see the strategies and the difficulties, strengths from more than one side if you're able to pop your questions and your experiences into the chat. My name is Paula Gilhooly and I'm the Education Advisor in Adoption UK Scotland. We're absolutely delighted to welcome Gerry back tonight. The response to tickets has been phenomenal, and it just shows how important this topic is for parents and for professionals. It might interest you to know that about 3/4 of the people registered tonight are either education staff or professionals, and the other quarter are predominantly parents and carers. But in that mix of people, we also have a percentage of people who have experience of care themselves too. So a real mix of people joining us tonight. So it'll be a really rich experience in the chat. So I think I've talked for long enough. Let me hand over to the very fabulous Gerry, nurture practitioner, CBT, mindfulness practitioner, and very passionate advocate for our young people. Gerry, off you go.
Okay, can you hear me okay? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to thank again Adoption UK for inviting me along again tonight. I think this is the third kind of time I've been doing some wee webinars for them on various other topics. So tonight I'm really going to be focusing on trauma and adverse childhood experiences and how this impacts our young people, even the young people within your own environment. But this is going to be really about young people within our educational establishments. So I always kind of just start off with this first slide here, but just as I said there, just hopefully this evening, the following presentation that I'm going to be providing you will give you more of an insight into how extreme prolonged patterns of stress impact a young person's developing brain and body. So again, it's called Navigating the School Environment with Racism and Trauma. And many of you have probably seen this quote from Gabor Mate. I had the privilege of seeing Gabor in Glasgow through the Aware Nation, and James Docherty and various other people who brought Gabor over. And I always generally use this quote from him at the start of my sessions, and it's: trauma is not what happens to you, trauma is what happens inside of you. So trauma is what happens inside of you as a result of what happens to you. So generally young people from adversity, their nervous systems have been frozen, and they're more or less, the stress is exacerbated with all the stuff that's been on regarding their environments and other things. So hopefully you'll enjoy this session today. My next slide has just got a list of adverse childhood experiences. So when I talk about adverse childhood experiences, we talk about adverse childhood experience without a buffer, without a regulatory force. Adverse childhood experiences, they can cause a whole cascade of risk to the developing brain and body, and we have got a list here. So I've got domestic violence, we have parental abandonment through separation or divorce, being the victim of abuse, physical, sexual and or emotional, being the victim of neglect, physical and emotional, a member of the household being in prison, growing up in a household where our adults experiencing alcohol or drug misuse problems. There are also probably many more. In fact, there is many more. Here's another quote I quite like, and I'm going to be kind of talking a wee bit about this. So again, the human brain is shaped by its environment. So it's about creating that environment. And we've got this quote here, and the quote says, when a flower doesn't bloom, you don't fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So what does a flower need to properly grow in an environment, or what does a plant need, or a lettuce or whatever? It needs watered. It needs conditions, the proper conditions. Some people say if you talk nice to a plant, it grows as well. So if a plant's going to get all these watered, get the correct conditions, we talk nice to it, it's going to develop better. But if you're brought up in chaos and unpredictability, as a lot of young people through adversity are, and a lot of people you might work with through the care side of things, or young people that come into your school environments, a lot of these young people are brought up in chaos and unpredictability. And with that unpredictability, you can end up with a conditioned response. You end up with these conditions that shape the brain. But also, many of the caregivers may be unconsciously passing on their trauma. A lot of people don't think of that, but a lot of these caregivers, they're not, dysfunction gets normalized. So many of them are just unconsciously passing on their trauma. So again, this is when a flower doesn't bloom, you fix the environment in which it grows, not the flower. So I'm going to just talk a wee bit about some of the things that we will come across in your environments that you work in, or on day-to-day basis regarding the young people who you come in contact with. So again, this is a bit trigger warnings. And it's not what's wrong with you, but what has happened to you. I always call us a trauma-informed, looking at behaviour through a trauma-informed lens, and simply asking ourselves and each other, what is going on? And I always say that's about being curious about the behaviour, and showing a bit of curiosity. Why is it going on? What has happened today? Or what is a history of adversity? What is our role in it? How can we buffer the trauma, the stress, the dysregulation? And how can we lead this to relationships and recovery? So how can I provide relational wealth? We talk about relational wealth because a lot of these young people have had relational poverty. A lack of connectedness is one of the biggest adversities out there. So it's about providing a refuge for them, an oasis of sanity, which can open up conversations about how they feel. So if you're going to provide that safe environment for that person to share how they're feeling, that opens up conversations about how they feel. And again, we're willing to bring it into the context of relationships. So we talk about positive stress, brief increases of heart rate, mild elevation of stress hormones, could be dropping off at day camp, losing a soccer game, overcoming a fear of swimming. And we can develop a sense of mastery that's critical for healthy development. And again, all these things are provided with a buffer and not without a buffer. We also look at tolerable stress, maybe a summer away from home, death of a loved one, persistent discrimination. And again, we talk a lot about these experiences with a buffer to help with the tolerable stress that you're going through. But we also look at one of the big ones, toxic stress. And I'm going to talk a wee bit about this toxic stress. So toxic stress is a prolonged activation of the stress response system in the absence of protective relationships. Examples: physical or emotional abuse, chronic neglect, exposure to violence, extreme neglect. So how does the body respond? The body will respond with an overactive stress response. It's like stepping out in front of a truck with many of these young people. So I'm going to kind of just stick on this slide for a wee minute and just talk a wee bit about brain development here. So if we think of when a baby's born or before it's born, even in utero, there's explosive growth in the first 9 months in utero, absolutely explosive growth, creating neurons and networks and for movement and all sorts of things are going on. But actually, when obviously the baby's born, the brain is still very underdeveloped. So in this brain, really, it's so undeveloped that there's an important set of components. And when I start to talk about the levels of the brain here, when I think about the brain, I think of the brain as one house, but it's got 3 different floors. And I will go on about that further on in the presentation. But right at the bottom of the brain is an important set of components called core regulatory networks. And they contain norepinephrine systems, they contain dopamine systems, they contain serotonin systems. And again, these are in the lower brain regions. And what these regions do, these regions send out projections to every single part of the developing brain and the developing body. But they also receive input from an environment. And I will talk about that in a couple of slides on for that. But if these core regulatory networks are down at the bottom of the brain, if these systems are disrupted through chaos, adversity, or what we refer to as trauma, there's a cascade of risks to all areas that they communicate with. So as the brain starts to organise, and a lot of the Bruce Perry's work, a lot of you are probably familiar with Bruce Perry, when the brain starts to organise sequentially, the areas responsible for relationships, planning, are receiving abnormal information from the stress response signals. So these lower parts of the brain are sending information to the higher parts that I'm not safe, things are unpredictable. The next slide I'm going to go into here is a wee bit about our window of tolerance. So each of us, every one of us actually have a window of tolerance. And our window of tolerance is how stress, is how we are really modelled to cope. Each of us have a window of stress and how we are modelled to cope with stress. But through trauma, which is an event, so through trauma, which is an event or events of something that disrupts the physical systems, that compromises function, we can end up with a very narrow window of tolerance. Trauma gets stored in the body because our nervous systems interprets the world differently. So if we were to look at this here, so what I'm kind of saying, if you were taking in all these things that I was talking about in the last slide, the adversity, unpredictability, chaos, threat, this really compromises the functions, and we end up with a very, very, very narrow window of tolerance. So if we look at some of the systems here, we've got hyperarousal, high energy, anxiety, anger, overwhelm, hypervigilance, fight or flight, or chaotic. Many of us have probably seen these responses with the young people we work with. If it dropped down to hypoarousal, we can shut down, we become numb, depressed, passive, withdrawn, freeze, and they feel shame. So if we were to think of these window of tolerance lines in the middle, now the window of tolerance in the middle is grounded, flexible, open and curious, present, and able to emotionally self-regulate. When we're in this part of our window of tolerance, we're more or less in our cortex. We're more or less in our prefrontal cortex. But when we're in hyperarousal or hypo, we are down in the lower parts of the brain. These lower parts of the brain have been disrupted and it's affecting our stress response. So young people have suffered trauma, chaos, adversity, unpredictability. Their window of tolerance is dead narrow, and they easily can move into hyperarousal or hypoarousal. Now, I'll come into some things later on in this presentation about how we can make our young people's window of tolerance wider instead of being narrow, and that's giving them skills and plus how we work with them as well. So again, a lot of us have seen the window of tolerance, and this is a more kind of simplified version of that. And these are a lot of the experiences that we see through an overactive stress response. So triggers. So again, we process information through the 5 senses. Everything we see, everything we hear, everything we smell, everything we taste, everything we touch. And this also can remind a lot of young people with trauma from the past. A sense of smell could be, well, if I was to talk about maybe a deep voice, if a young person experienced an adult who was unpredictable, chaotic, and had their own issues going on, and they heard a lot of shouting through a deep voice. If a young person who was maybe in the classroom and was maybe hearing a loud shouting deep voice by a teacher or another member of staff, that could remind them of the past, of what they've experienced. And again, this would infect their internal world and their window of tolerance. There also could be no perceived threat to their safety or stability. These lower systems, stress response become problematic. And that's what I was talking about in the last slide. That when these lower brain systems are disrupted through chaos, unpredictability, and they're receiving messages from the environment, and these core regulatory networks are sending messages out to the rest of the brain. So the brain's not really developing properly because they're more or less been stuck in the lower parts of the brain. So triggers activate the lower parts of the brain and the stress response is activated. We get hypervigilant. We also got hyperarousal. And it sometimes looks like a young person has got a fight or flight or freeze jammed on. That shows up sometimes as bad attitude or bad behaviour. But what I always say to staff is try to remember this. If a young person is showing stress behaviour, and that's how I look at it, as stress behaviour, it's not about you, it's about how they're feeling. So don't take it personally. Don't take it personally. They're just expressing their emotions in the only way they know how. And the only way they know how. Because again, that's a conditioned response. It's a conditioned response. So my next slide here is, so what is actually happening? So I'm going to get into a bit about brain development here. A lot of us have probably seen this. This is called the upside down triangle of the brain. And again, it's a lot from Bruce Perry's neurosequential work. So the brain organizes in a sequential way and it processes information also sequentially. So if we were to look at the bottom part of the brain, the part where it's got regulate, and when I was talking about these core regulatory networks, they're grounded down at these parts of the brain. They're grounded in the lowest part of the brain regions. So what happens is these core regulatory networks are involved in the stress response, and these can impact these higher parts of the brain. So again, if we were to think this again as the upside down triangle of the brain, if it would start from the bottom, regulate. If these young people are receiving messages from their environment that it's not safe, it's unpredictable, it's chaotic, these can impact these lower parts of the brain, and it causes a whole cascade of risk to the other parts of the developing brain. So again, if I was to go through the parts of the brain here about regulation, if we're working with young people and we're engaging with them in a way that we want them to listen to us, they have to be regulated first. If they're regulated first, then we can relate to them, and then we can reason and then reflect. So that's the same situation. If you've got a young person who's maybe coming to you and they're showing a stress response, you cannot reason with this young person. You cannot reason with them until they're regulated. It's like a young person I was working with a wee while ago, and they came into my room very dysregulated. So I wasn't just going straight for the reasoning part. I had to regulate them first, get their heartbeat down, get their breathing more into rhythm, and then I more or less related with them. How are they feeling? Understanding how they're feeling. And then once I'd done these bottom parts of the brain, I was managing to get the top part of the brain, and then reason and reflect. And they were able to discuss with me how they were feeling. They weren't going to discuss with me how they were feeling from lower regions of the brain, because you're never going to be able to discuss how you feel from lower brain regions. This could be only done from the cortex. So if we were to look at trauma and brain development versus typical versus developmental trauma, again, long-term stress, the higher systems are underdeveloped, lowers are oversensitized. So all the stress that a young person experiences, the higher systems of the brain are underdeveloped and the lower are oversensitized. So if you were to look at this slide here, and you're thinking of a young person with typical development on the left-hand side, the cognitive part of the brain's so open. So if you were to think again of the upside-down triangle of the brain, the cognitive part's open. Their cortex is open for business and they're ready to learn. The other parts are more tucked in, and their cognitive part's open and they're ready to all this information in the class. As I always say to young people, for you to learn maths, English, science, geography, or any subject, or have a conversation with someone, the cognitive part of your brain has to be accessible. If it's not accessible, we're going to struggle. But you look at the problems that a young person has with developmental trauma. You look at the cognitive part of the brain, it's closed. They're not getting access to it because the lower regions of the brain are in survival, or they're struggling to regulate, or they're struggling with their social and emotional skills. So my job really is a nurture teacher in the other work that I do in the school, is to get these cognitive parts of these young people more open, so they'll be able to access learning as best as they possibly can. So again, that's just a trauma and brain development, typical development versus developmental trauma. And you can really see the issues that young people experience through trauma and brain development. Really, they're struggling to access their cortex because the lower regions of the brain are under absolute stress. But if a young person with typical development, they're managing to hit these cognitive parts of the brain to fully engage in learning. A lot of us have seen this sequence. This is Bruce Perry again, the regulate, relate, reason, and it's reaching the learning brain. So again, heading straight for the reasoning part of the brain cannot work if a child is dysregulated and disconnected from others. So this has all got to be done in sequence. We've got to regulate the young person. And I'm going to explain that in the next slide, which gives you a wee bit more about it. We've got to regulate them. Then we've got to relate with them. And then we've got to reason. And that's when we can start to find out actually what's going on or what's happened to them. So it gives you a wee bit more of an explanation here. So again, reaching the learning brain. First of all, we've got to regulate them. The sensory motor brain helps a child to regulate and calm their stress response, the fight, flight, freeze, offer soothing, comfort and reassurance. Relate, when we're moving into the middle part of the brain, the limbic area. the emotional relational brain. Connect with the child through attuned, sensitive relationships, empathize and validate the child's feelings so they feel seen, heard and understood. And then we're in the cortex, we're in the cortical brain. The chief, more or less I call it the chief executive. So we're in the cortical brain, the great human thinking brain. Now that the child is calm and connected, they're able to fully engage in learning. Heading straight for the reasoning part of the brain cannot work if a child is dysregulated and disconnected from others. We'll also talk about this as well as strong relationships. Relationships really come into to this when you are regulating a child. If you've got strong relationships and you can co-regulate with the person, you can open the door and discuss, and again, in a way which is healthy, supportive. And these relationships in safe environment, co-regulation, breathing, all these sorts of things help a young person reach the learning brain. So again, I'm going to go into a wee bit about how we can help the young person. So it's asking, it's not what's wrong with you. So if you're asking a child, what's wrong with you? This can lead to many things. If someone's asking us as an adult, saying, what's wrong with you today or whatever, it can be quite embarrassing. It can be quite hurtful. So if we're asking a young person, what's wrong with you? To me, this can lead to many things, and I've got a wee list of them here. It can lead to judgment. It can lead to blame, because they could maybe start to get a wee bit dysregulated because of that. Maybe you think you're blaming them for something if you're asking what's wrong with them. It can sometimes lead to shame, and it could sometimes lead to punishment as well. Because if you might ask a young person, what's wrong with you? It could start the conversation of, what do you mean, what's wrong with me? And that can go down, I will always say a me against you scenario. But instead, we're trying to look at a me with you scenario. And I'm going to come on to this in the next slide. So again, asking a young person what's wrong with you can lead to a me against you scenario. But what if we started to ask her? But what if we started to ask the young person what's happened to you, or what has happened to this young person? What if we became curious? What if we became a wee bit curious of this young person's acting a wee bit differently here? There's something just not sitting right with me. So if we became a bit more curious, showed a bit more compassion in our response, and again we started to ask ourselves, what's happened to this young person? Maybe what's going on? So this can lead to time in. I'm going to get into a bit more in depth about what time is. So if we look at more time in instead of time out, people might maybe think of a young person, if they're maybe in the classroom and they maybe say to the young person, you need a bit of time out. I would actually think the young person is needing a bit of time in. And I'll come on to that in the next slide. A bit more compassion, a bit more understanding, nurturing. And again, if we're nurturing, understanding, compassion, this can lead to healing, building positive relationships and recovery. So I would always call this a more trauma-informed response. And I think it's a bit more developmentally appropriate as well, regarding the language we're using. So here what I was talking about with time in. That's how I like the word time in. If your son saying time out, you're more or less saying you need to go and have a bit of time out. Maybe it's to yourself. So I would like to say, do you want to go and have a bit of time in? A bit of time in with yourself. So what's time in then? Time in creates a me with you scenario. If you're engaging with a young person, or you're letting them maybe understand about regulation, they could maybe have a bit of time in with themselves as well to manage to regulate. And again, we've got to co-regulate with them as well. But timing creates a me with you scenario, and it teaches children that feelings are okay. If you're constantly removing them or excluding them, and then listen, I often get this argument about excluding pupils, and I know there's situations we need to exclude pupils. And if I always talk about trauma-informed, trauma-responsive approaches, people always say to me, or they think you're excusing the behaviour. You're not excusing the behaviour. You're actually looking at the behaviour with a bit more understanding. So again, if we're going to create time in, we are creating a me with you scenario. and that teaches children that feelings are okay. Also teaches children that they can get support when they have a difficult time. I call it emotional availability. My room door in my nurture room, I always try to make myself emotionally available for my young people. Emotional availability is so crucial, and it might only take 30 seconds. They might come to my room, or I might be in the corridor or whatever it is, and they might just want to check in with me. I might say, sorry, I'm in a rush, I need to go to the next class, or I need to go and do whatever. But 10 seconds of emotional availability is so crucial. And it works, because I've seen it work. I've seen a young person come to see me and they maybe just want to check in, or I'm going to this next class, and I've said, right, okay, right, how are you feeling? Right, okay, that's really good, you're doing well. And that drip feeding of positive recognition, that just emotional availability for 30 seconds, through a neurobiological lens, emotional availability is so crucial. So again, being emotionally available teaches the children that feelings are okay. It teaches children that they can get support when they're having a difficult time. Again, about creating safe spaces. I don't know what your schools are like, or any other places you're working in, but we have zones of regulation. If a young person is needing to regulate and they need that emotional availability, they can come to one of the members of staff who is available, and that member of staff will be emotionally available for them. Instead of, again, having time out, or just go and sit in a room, or just sit in the benches out there. They need an adult to be emotionally available, to get them even ready for, maybe to be available for that period there, but to get them regulated and ready and cortex open for the next period. So again, that's about co-regulating with a child. And the more we co-regulate with a child, that increases the child's regulation skills. If we're constantly co-regulating and learning them co-regulation and constantly being emotionally available for them, they're going to manage to co-regulate themselves. That's what neuroplasticity does. Through repetition of regulation, and that creates the neuroplasticity for the child eventually to be able to regulate themselves. And it also strengthens the relationships between the child and the adult. Again, and again, I always come back to help the child with self-regulation through repetition. So it's so important to have these time-ins. And again, I'll go through them once more, creating a me with you scenario, teaching children that feelings are okay. Instead of having time out and say, I won't suppress your feelings. I won't sit outside or sit in that room at the moment and have a good think to yourself what you've done. That's not doing a child any good. They need a bit of time in, they need emotional availability. And again, that teaches a child that they can get support when they're having a difficult time. We're co-regulating them. We're increasing the child's regulation skills where they're doing that. We're opening up the conversations, because if they start to trust you and you're showing your emotional availability, they will open up to you about how they feel. They will open up to you. There's no other words. They will do that. And that again will strengthen the relationships between the child and the adult. What does time out do? Time out teaches children that isolation is the best way to deal with feelings. And what can happen when a child is told to suppress or isolate their feelings? It can cause a whole cascade of problems. Some children might adopt or adapt to different cope mechanisms. Instead of having that person they need to talk to discuss their feelings, if they've got no one there to talk to about it, if they've not got any emotional availability or a bit of relational wealth from a member of staff, they might find other cope mechanisms or other places to self-soothe, and that can lead to a whole cascade of problems. So time out again teaches the children that isolation is the best way to deal with feelings. It creates a disconnect in the relationship between the child and the adult. This also can prolong the child's upset and stress, and it also does up the stress response. And again, if you're turning a child away because you've not got 30 seconds to be emotionally available for them, this can hinder their regulation skills as well. And teaching them time out is not healthy for them at all. So always try to look for time in. So spend a wee bit of time in this about trauma informed. What's trauma informed? We can be We always talk about trauma informed. All our schools trauma informed, or I've been trauma informed because I know about trauma and whatever. But again, it's how you manage to use that, how you move on to the next step. As I always say, trauma response is a mind shift change. How you respond to the young person. We can be trauma informed as much as we like, but it's how we move on and do the next part, be trauma responsive. So we've got trauma informed here first of all. And trauma informed is about realizing the impact of trauma and understanding the potential paths of recovery. Recognize the signs of symptoms in trauma. And when I talk a wee bit about realizing the impact of trauma, I always talk a wee bit about how the brain's organized. Whenever I'm running group work, I'm doing one-to-one, I always ask for 2 pieces of information. And this is me being trauma informed. So if I'm looking for, if I'm doing group work or one-to-one with pupils, which I'm doing so many one-to-ones at the moment, I look for 2 pieces of information. And this is me being trauma informed, so I can be trauma responsive to the young person, so I'm not actually causing more damage. So the 2 pieces of information I look for is what has been the history of adversity. So that's the first piece of information I'm looking for. What is this young person's history of adversity? And the second piece of information I look for is, where are they developmentally? That's so I can put in developmentally appropriate interventions. I'm not actually putting in things that are too hard for them or too much for them, and I'm causing more stress. So that's the 2 things I always ask is, give me some pieces of information about the history of adversity, and I can check what kind of intervention I'm putting in. So for instance, I'll use an example here about being trauma informed and then how I can be more trauma responsive. If I have a young person who's had chronic stress, has an unpredictability, chaos, threat, that means that I am needing to work from a more emotional level. I'm needing to heal or more or less repair the lower parts of their brain. Now I do CBT as well. If I am going to do CBT, I will not do CBT if I need to do bottom up. So bottom up is, again, is working with a lot of people through trauma, and they need to be regulated at an emotional level first. If you're going to move in with CBT, it's not going to stick. CBT is not going to stick. So you have to repair things at a subconscious level first before you move into the CBT work. But I might have people coming to me with no trauma. They've had a nurturing environment. Their parents or caregivers are doing a good job in bringing them up, and they're doing well in school. But then they might hit patches of anxiety, and that could be just worrying about tests, maybe worrying about certain classes. And that's when CBT will work, because that's more or less working with their thoughts, working with their cognitive part of the brain. But again, if you're working with a young person with trauma-related issues, you can't deal with the cognitive part, because they can't reach the cognitive part, because the trauma, the unpredictability, the chaos, the threat are stuck at a subconscious level. It's stuck at a limbic and brainstem level. So we need to correct these parts first before we start any cognitive work. So again, just a wee bit of understanding on that, if you are working with young person with trauma, and that's the same when you think about it. If a young person, and I know it's difficult, if you've got so many young people coming into classrooms, and that's one of the things we need to think about. And it's a whole thing I think it needs revamped regarding education. Is you might have kids who are on S2 who are 14 or 13, 14-year-old, we'll say 14 years old, and they're chronologically 14, and they're coming to your class, and we're trying to set them developmental, appropriate 14-year-old interventions and try to give them the social skills, but they've really got the developmental infrastructure of a 6-year-old. They're not going to manage that. They're not going to manage that, and when they're feeling the impact of, I'm not managing, I'm not coping, we're only activating their stress even more, and the cortex is just closing. So it's about understanding that as well. You might have chronologically 14-year-olds come into your classroom or into your group work or whatever it is, but they might have the developmental infrastructure, the social skills of a 7-year-old. And it's so crucial to remember that. So crucial to remember that. So again, it's about recognising the signs of symptoms of trauma. And again, that's what I was talking about there, about how the brain is organised. What is their history of adversity? And again, it's so crucial to ask these two questions of what's their history of adversity and where are they developmentally? Also, what has been missing in their lives? Relational poverty, lack of connectedness, trauma, adversity, lots of things. But one of the biggest traumas out there, again, is lack of connectedness. So what we need to look at is key tools for building attachment. We're looking at building relational wealth. A lot of these kids have had relational poverty. And what you will notice is kids, what I notice in many kids that I work with, a lot of kids who have lack of connectedness and relational poverty, they're looking to be constantly validated. They might want to, if they're maybe making a card, they might want to make several cards to give to maybe deputy head teachers. They might have other things there they want to share, and they maybe want to be told how well they're doing consistently. They're just looking for validation because they've never really been validated from the caregivers in their life as well. But again, it's no about blaming and shaming and parents or caregivers. They're just working with the tools that they've got. And always say, if I was going to go back to a few slides earlier, we need to reform the environments where these young people are raised as well. We need to help parents manage big emotions. They may be running from their trauma as well, and then they're just again unconsciously passing on their trauma to the young people. So I think my job is so important in the job that I do in my school, is that I'm trying to fan the flames out. I'm trying to give the young people the tools, the skills of regulation, because they're going to be the future adults. They're going to be the parents, the future parents, and we need to have them regulated and be emotionally available for their kids. We really need that. So jumping back onto again at the trauma informed, we need to recognise what has been missing in their lives, key tools for building attachment, and again, being aware of the biological content of developmental trauma. And I think that's so important. We don't need to be therapists, but I think it's just understanding how a young person's organised, how the brain's organised through a developmental lens. And again, I think it's how you break it down. And I think most of the young people I work with on a one-to-one or through group work or through my nurture, they're so developmentally informed and they could tell you so much about the brain, so much about their stress response. People can come in and have a conversation with me and they're maybe no managed in class too well. And they will say to me, I know how I wasn't coping well because my cortex is closed because I was stressed. For that young person to communicate that information to me is unbelievable. It's absolutely unbelievable. And then they know what's actually happening, because what they were actually doing earlier, or maybe 4 or 6 months ago, is telling themselves, I'm stupid, I'm not worth it. But now they're managing to have a conversation to me and say, I wasn't learning too well in that class there. I was feeling stressed and overwhelmed and my cortex closed. How good's that? I mean, how good's that? So I'm going to go to the next slide here, which is about trauma responsive. So what has been trauma responsive? Trauma responsive is creating a sense of safety within your school environment. Again, we've got zones of regulation in our school. We've got members of staff who can manage to co-regulate, because I would say we're quite good at that in our school. We've got our nurture room. We also look at strategies and support for healthy development. And again, that's looking at through a developmental lens. Recognise and respond to the impact of traumatic stress. And again, that's so important about being trauma responsive, understanding and recognising and responding to traumatic stress. If you're talking about traumatic stress, you also need to know how the brain's developed. You also need to know about the stress response. You also need to know a bit obviously about the nervous system, the window of tolerance, sympathetic nervous systems, parasympathetics. And again, if you bring it down to small chunks, if my young people can understand it, if staff want to know about it, it's not really that hard to understand if you break it down for them. So again, infuse and sustain trauma awareness and knowledge in the school system. Keep the training going, keep the process going. When I always talk about, you're always looking to reach the next level. I always say, you never hit a point and say, we've made it, we've done it, look how far we've got, because you never stop learning. You're never ever going to stop being trauma reformed or trauma responsive. There's always something to learn and always something to raise that bar to the next level. Our school, we had about 3 years ago, some of you might have attended are on this webinar tonight, we had a Nurturing Positive Relationships Festival. And that was about infusing trauma-informed responsive practices to people within the authority. So what we done is we ran a festival, and we invited Suzanne Zedike from the science, and then we invited James Docherty from professional lived experience. And that again explained to our staff about the science and actually what's impacting the young people within our school environment. So we had about 600 attending that day. And that again kept the process going. We also do a lot of training. This webinar I'm showing you, that I'll do that with staff. So it's about keeping the ball rolling within your school environment. Always don't say, oh, we've made it. That's us now. We've got to where we are. Every day is a school day for being trauma informed and trauma responsive. So again, putting forward interventions and support. Our intervention support need to be with a developmentally informed lens. Again, where are the young person? Where's the young person developmentally? And again, scaffolding experiences. I'm going to just go on again about a wee example about being trauma responsive. I'm going to use a young person from a school. We had a young person with chronic anxiety, chronic stress, trauma, adversity. They had 29% attendance. Okay. You could easily go down the route of saying you need to get into school, you need to get into classes and come out with all this trauma, uninformed, unresponsive stuff. So I started to do a bit of work with this young person and find out, first of all, build the relationships, because that's so crucial, and then find out a wee bit about their adversity. So once I started to build relationships, and then what we had to do next, we started to scaffold experiences, scaffold gradual experiences of this young person, find out what they needed in the classroom, find out what they needed from the teacher, find out what they needed for the classroom environment. So after various conversations with the young person, the young person wasn't making a choice to just sit at home. It wasn't a conscious choice to say, I'm staying at home and I'm not coming into school. It wasn't a conscious choice. She was suffering from chronic stress. She was all the thoughts of coming into school, coming into the class, and people asking her, where have you been? Worried about falling behind in work, worrying about catching up in work. So we put a plan together. I started about a developmentally informed, responsive plan for this young person. So first of all, it was discussing with the teacher about this young person. Don't call her out in class. Don't call a young person into uncomfortable situations. They maybe need seated at a certain place in the classroom. If we need to communicate with the young person, even if it's just walking up next to them, having a wee quiet word with them. And eventually, when we started to scaffold in and gradually build up the classes, building up a wee bit of knowledge for the teachers about the young person, this young person is now coming more and more and more into school. And from when a young person with 29% attendance and going lower, the young person is now nearly 90% attendance, nearly 90% attendance, and a fully fledged participant in our school community. And it's an unbelievable turnaround. And that's what I mean by creating trauma-informed, first of all, and trauma-responsive practices. Understanding how the young person's organised, where are they developmentally, what's their history of adversity, and then you can start to put in plans and respond in a way that's responsive and respectful to the young person. So this young person's went from 29% attendance to 90. And it feels so good to see that young person walking along the corridor with a school bag over their shoulder and walking into classrooms, plus building up their own techniques of how to manage. It was actually interesting on one of my one-to-one sessions with a young person last week, when the young person was looking in her school bag, and she said, I'm going to check for my Spanish jotter just now. So we're kind of doing our one-to-one. I was doing their window of tolerance and other wee things with her. So I just want to check for my Spanish jotter here. And I said 6 months ago, you wouldn't even been worried about a Spanish jotter. And she said to me, 6 months ago, I wouldn't even brought in a school bag. I wouldn't even been in school. And again, that's what being more trauma-informed responsive does to a young person. Scaffolding experiences, finding out where they are and building them up gradually. And now, piece by piece, I'm starting to take the scaffolding away. I used to see the young person quite a bit, but I'm really only seeing them when I do my one-to-ones, because they're spending more of their time in the classroom. And what the young person was speaking to me the other day, she said, I'm now starting to put my hand up in class, and actually the teacher asked me something and I actually gave a reply. And that was something she wouldn't have done 6 months ago. Amazing journey and an amazing example of being trauma-informed and responsive, creating a sense of safety within the school environment, strategies to support the young person, recognising and responding to the impact of the young person's stress and putting in the proper supportive scaffolding experiences, infusing and sustaining trauma awareness with the teachers, getting the knowledge into the school system, and then putting the interventions and support in. And that's not just one person I'm talking about. I'm talking with many young people now. Many young people. I could spend 3 hours talking about the difference at trauma-informed responsive approaches make with young people, understanding how they're organised, putting in proper trauma-informed responsive interventions, instead of just rushing in and think you're going to get a quick fix, because it's not a quick fix. A wee bit about ourselves, because I've been talking that much about the young people we're working with. Self-care. We need to look after our own self. So self-care, why self-care isn't selfish? We need to recognise that it's okay to take care of ourselves. It's so important. We need to take care of ourselves if we're going to provide in co-regulation, and our young person, the young people I work with, are going to be meeting us in a regulated state. So we need to think of what self-care works for ourselves. One of the things that I do in school, what we have is we have mindfulness for staff. So I'm the school mindfulness lead, plus I also teach mindfulness to the young people. So our staff come for twilight sessions after school. We're going to be starting again after Christmas, and the staff will go through a 10-week mindfulness-based living course. And that again is looking after their own self. And it's interesting saying that, because one of the people said to me not long ago, they said, we know that we kind of can recognise the teachers that practice mindfulness. And that was quite interesting. But also the young people get mindfulness as well. I never mentioned that. And I do that in one of my other presentations, that our pupils have a 10-week mindfulness course as well. So they go through a 10-week mindfulness course, and they go through a 10-week cognitive behavioural therapy course that I run as well. But again, I'll make sure that young person is ready to participate in CBT. And again, that's about me being trauma-informed and trauma-responsive. So self-care, what works for you? Could be nutrition. We need plenty of nutrition, water, whatever we need, all these different foods, bananas, all these sort of things that I was a terrible coffee drinker. I found I was drinking too much coffee. So I had to be very conscious of that, and I started to change my habits. So now I spend more of my time in school, probably during my day, I drink about 2 litres of water instead of drink more coffee. So I had to be very conscious. I was very conscious of how much coffee I was drinking. I said, I need to stop this, because this is not healthy. Mindfulness is brilliant. Again, I'm a teacher of mindfulness. I'm a mindfulness practitioner. I teach it to pupils, I teach it to staff, but I also do it myself. And even during my day, I might be doing one-to-ones, but I also might be taking all that emotional availability that I need to help a young person. That can be quite tiring and quite draining. So when I've maybe finished working with a young person, or a young person has just come in to my room and I'm maybe available for them, I might have to spend 30 to 45 minutes being emotionally available for them. And you'll know yourself as working with either parents or caregivers, how tiring that can be. So I do even be simple things like a 1 minute or 30 seconds of breathing exercises, deep abdominal breathing. And now what that does, that resets your nervous system back to a state where you can manage to move on during the rest of your day. And I'll do that at different points of the day. I'll do it at different points of the day. Even walks, lunch break, maybe having a walk, said I'm maybe sitting in the staff room, maybe taking your sandwiches, your juice or whatever, going a walk, or even a walk at night. We also know about pets. How good are pets? Probably some of you are feeling stressed out or going home from work and your dog jumping up on you and things like that. And maybe you just sitting at night with your dog or your cat or whatever. How self-soothing is that? So self-care helps prevent burnout. It reduces the negative psychological and physical effects of stress. Oh, it also helps you to be more productive and refocus on what is true and important. So self-care is crucial. I'm going to finish off in this last slide here. And there are one more just after this. So again, I want to thank you for listening. I'm just looking at my time and that's nearly been on an hour. My throat's getting a bit dry. So I just want to thank you for listening. And again, on my Twitter, it's at Gerry Diamond 71. My email is gerard.diamond@ourcloud.buzz. What I'm going to finish up here is, again, as a Bruce Perry quote. As you can see, I'm a big fan of Bruce Perry's work. The more healthy relationships a child has, the more likely they will be able to recover from trauma and thrive. Relationships are the agents of change and the most powerful therapy in human love. I'm just going to leave that up for another 5 seconds just to absorb and process that. It's so powerful. Again, there's some further information, books and websites. Some great books there. The Body Keeps the Score from Bessel van der Kolk. Deep as Well, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog, again from Dr. Bruce Perry. What Has Happened to You, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Connections Over Compliance, Laurie DeSatel's websites, we'll probably know a lot of them. Beacon House Therapeutic Services and Trauma Team, ACE Aware Nation, and ACES 2 High. So again, if you want to get in contact with myself regarding any more information, or again, any talks to schools or whatever, I'm actually doing, in December, I'm doing a talk to a school in Ireland, and then I'm doing one in London, just on this same topic here. So it's really, it's a topic at the moment. It's very important and very, very kind of crucial to how our young people are going to develop through and navigating life. So again, I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I'm going to pass it back on to the Adoption UK team.
That was great, Gerry. It's always such a pleasure to listen to you, and I know that that's what's coming through in the chat as well. We've got a few questions lined up for you, if that's okay, and I'll just work my way through them.
Yeah,
it's you that's doing all the work today. So the first question there is, how do you differentiate between a trauma response and age-appropriate developmental behaviour in younger children? You know, so children maybe who are just sort of testing boundaries.
Right. So we're talking a bit about, so what you're actually talking about here is misbehaviour and stress behaviour. Get to know the young person. You'll know yourself if they start to push boundaries. So I would say it's about getting to know them. And you'll generally find out through relationships and again, just navigating the environment and what's happening in it yourself. And sometimes if a pupil is pushing boundaries again or showing misbehaviour, there's generally something behind it.
Yeah, it's
And
never
again,
just
it's a bit
naughty.
moving back into the relationship side of thing and find out a wee bit more about what's going on, and just a wee quiet word as well. I mean, I always can say I've worked in secondary schools now for 15 years, and I can honestly say that I've never ever shouted at a young person. And what I know now, I'm glad I've never, because I know how much problems that can cause regarding trauma, regarding the young person saying, oh, because a young person has said to me before, if a member of staff shouts at me or whatever, I will, it takes me back into my childhood. It reminds me of when my parents used to shout. All these sorts of things. So it's or they'll give you two responses. They'll shout back at you, they'll laugh. So
I suppose thinking about myself and how much I've learned on my journey to where I am just now, and the things that I know now that maybe I wouldn't have done in the past. If you have done some of those things, but you know better,
listen,
then that's where we are. We're all on a journey working towards.
Easy to shout. It's the easiest thing to shout and raise your voice. It's dead easy. But one thing, you're not doing yourself any good. You're only activating your own stress, and what you're only causing, you might be causing a young person who's not actually involved in the incident. You might be causing them stress as well. So it's about how you manage it. How you manage it, and also being conscious of your own regulation as well.
Absolutely. There's another wee question here for you that says, well, do you have a link for the 10-week mindfulness course? Is that the .b one?
The .b, yeah. If you just write into Google, if you write in mindfulness in schools,
I put a wee link into something, so hopefully that was the right one.
Yeah, mindfulness in schools, that's what they're called. And they do several courses. They do one called Breathe, and that's a nice gentle 4-week course for young people. So the Breathe is a nice gentle introduction, and then you can actually build them up onto the 10-week course. But the course is absolutely brilliant. There's such a mixture in it, because before our kids came to the mindfulness course, they thought a lot of them was about breathing exercise, and it is a bit about that, but we do things like mindful eating, we do meditations. I mean, it's see that how powerful it is when you've got 30 young people lying in your room in silence, and that, you need to be trauma aware about it and trauma sensitive with your mindfulness as well. And you're going through a meditation or a mindfulness meditation exercise, and they're just lying there, just absolutely loving it and regulated and whatever else. It's so powerful.
There was a question from someone about concerns over mindfulness with some young people that have experienced trauma.
Yeah, you have to be, especially when you're doing gratitude. If you're going through a gratitude practice, you could be asking what you're grateful for in life, and start to get into a gratitude practice. So I always if I'm doing it, you need to be mindfully aware, trauma sensitive and trauma aware and responsive about what you're actually doing. And what I generally do is I would make the young people aware. Anytime I'm doing a practice, I'll tell them about it the week before. So I would say next week we're going to be doing some practices regarding gratitude. This is what it involves. If you have any concerns or anything you feel uncomfortable with, come and have a wee chat with me.
That sounds like a good plan.
Because I've had kids who maybe don't want to do some of the practices, and you don't need to do the practice. You can get involved in some of the other stuff. So it's just finding out what's comfortable for them. And that's about, again, them being trauma informed and responsive to their needs.
Absolutely, just thinking about them.
Yeah.
And is it okay for, someone's asking if they can share the presentation with staff?
Of course. Yeah,
so
of course.
Would it be okay for us to send
out
your
that's
slides?
up to you. You're obviously recording it and putting it out there.
And if it's okay with you, I can send out slides if you're happy for that to go out.
Absolutely, no worries at all. Yeah.
Okay. And another question from someone: what intervention or support would be appropriate for young people who have experienced significant trauma? So this person's had many situations where counselling and CBT have not been appropriate, just like you said, for the level of trauma.
Yeah. See, I would say if it's finding out what their strengths and first of all, it's got to be done. Relationships have got to be built first. Everything, the foundations of any trauma-informed responsive work is through the context of relationships. Okay, and then you can start to build foundations there. If you're starting to build the relationships, and then they're starting to put trust in you, and then you're starting to find out about their strengths and vulnerabilities, then you can start to put in, I would say, small, I call it I would call it just gradual exposure. What I was talking about earlier about that young person, I was talking about the gradual exposure, building relationships. And I mean, when I talk about nurture groups as well, if you think about nurture groups coming in, and if I'm going to bring the regulate, relate, reason context into that, and this is the same as you're working with any young kid who, if a young person through trauma and adversity and chaos, unpredictability, have come to maybe do one-to-one with you, or you've got a nurture group who many of the kids in nurture have had adverse childhood experiences without a buffer. And we need to remember, people might have had adversity, but they've had that buffer there to help guide them through it. But if they've been exposed to many things, it's about regulating them first. And that's what we do. And that's what even I do with my one-to-ones or my group work or nurture. It's about regulating them first, getting them comfortable in that environment, building the relationships. And once we get them regulated, comfortable with their environment, and then we can start to reason with them. You're more or less into their emotional brain, starting to build with their relationships. And that takes time, and then you can get the cortex, and then we start to reason and reflect. So that's a good process to get through if you're working a young person from trauma, is start with the foundations, the relationships, and then we can start to use regulation skills, connect with them, and then find out what their strengths and vulnerabilities are, find out what they're comfortable doing, and then start to scaffold the experiences in. So you're not going to, because what happens if you put a young person into a situation where you say, no, you just need to go into that class and you try and put them in, you're only setting them up for failure. You're setting them up for failure. And what's going to happen is they're not wanting to get back there. Or even if you put into the skills to say, here's all this skill set I'm giving you, but you're going back into that class where that bad thing's happened, they're not wanting to get back. So it's got to be done through gradual exposure. And that takes time. That takes time, but it has to take time. It's not a quick fix.
No, there's nothing really here that's a quick fix. You have to put an awful lot of effort in, and it's all those repeated interactions that you have, and that's what's so lovely about some of the Bruce Perry work.
Well, that's what I always say. What a quote I always use when I'm talking to staff, and I'll say, it's not about changing the behaviour, it's about healing the brain. And once you heal the brain, then you'll see changes in behaviour. So that takes a bit of time.
And every little tiny interaction, like you said, in those 10 seconds, 20 seconds that you've got is your opportunity to lay some of the foundations for that.
That's one thing that I didn't touch on there. I'm sorry if some people want to ask questions. Teachers might be on here and saying, oh, I've not got 10 minutes to regulate, relate, reason with a young person. I've got other things in the class, and I totally understand that. But see neurobiologically, right? It takes about 10 seconds, or sorry, less than that, about 3 seconds in a class. If that young person, it's just what can I do for you? How are you doing? So glad you're in my class today. If you need me, see these drip, 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 drip can make such a positive impact. And it doesn't need to be hanging over people for 10 minutes. Neurobiologically, it only takes 3 seconds of drip, 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 drip at certain times.
Well, that's a lovely thing to take away. We can all do with the 3 seconds. That's something easy for us to follow up on.
Yeah.
Another question for you. Can you recommend any parent courses to help with trauma and understanding a child?
I'm actually in the middle of creating one myself. And it's so I'm actually putting one that I've got the name, and I'm starting to put the slides together for it. And it's called Parenting with Keeping the Brain and Body in Mind. And again, it's I'll give the parents a bit understanding about brain development as well, and how to respond, and about regulation and self-care. So I'm in the middle of putting together a parent program. And again, that's called Parenting with Keeping the Brain and Body in Mind. But offhand, I don't, and that's what concerns me, is I can't think offhand and say, here's a trauma-informed responsive core or whatever it is for parents to understand how they're feeling, how they can best be emotionally available for their child or their young person. So that's why I've took on myself and said, I'm going to put a program together, got the name, Parenting with Keeping the Brain and Body in Mind, and I'm putting that together as we speak.
So we would also have courses in Adoption UK as well, which I'll be able to put some links into when I do a wee follow-up email, because Alison, who's our training lead, is always developing resources there, and we've got some I suppose stock courses, really, like the therapeutic parenting one that we'll send out links to. And obviously a lot of interest in what you're saying, and we would love to roll your model of therapeutic responses and understanding to all schools, because not every school system is not every school system is doing what you're doing, I think, out there, although many of us are trying to do that. But you seem to have a very full package of support.
I was talking to a school just the other day there, and they were saying, how have you done learning about the brain, learning about the nervous systems? And I was like, I hear that so often in the school. That's the first thing. You're not truly informed trauma responsive if you don't understand a bit about the neuroscience. Because what can happen if you don't understand about the neuroscience, and again, you may be unwittingly causing distress to the young person as well, because you're not knowing how to put a proper intervention in place or to properly communicate, because you might be, this young person might be communicating distress, you might be seeing it as misbehaviour or challenging behaviour.
Okay, I'll follow up with another question. So how would you respond when people say that a trauma-informed response allows the child to avoid the consequences of their behaviour? And also, and I suppose it is a really a big one to unpick. Also, if a child's behaviour is disruptive, is it appropriate that they, for example, are not allowed to play on school teams? To me, this seems like a time-out response, not a time-in response. So 2 bits there.
Right. I'll start with the second question first. So the second question was, if the young person is misbehaving,
and they're not allowed to play,
we're going to call it misbehaviour, but it might be stress behaviour. So so we'll just call it, so the young person's been acting out in school or in class or whatever. So for that response, you're not playing for the school team tomorrow, right? Is that going to work in the long term? Probably not, because if it's a child from trauma related difficulties, you can't punish these young people into a better way of being. It's not going to work. They've already been punished enough in their life. So we understand there's got to be consequences. And have this conversation all the time. People think if you're trauma-informed responsive, it's a get out, or these things have happened to them, so they're not getting punished and all these sort of things. There has to be boundaries and there has to be consequences, but it's how you have these conversations. And then that's when you start the repair after the rupture. That's what's important. Yeah, they maybe say, look, what happened yesterday, it was unacceptable and we know what's happened, but for that tomorrow, there has to be consequences, and tomorrow you're maybe not playing for the school team or whatever, but there are going to be further opportunities. But we really need to find what's going on, and then is there anything actually going on underneath the behaviour? Are there anything going on at home? There could be many factors in how this young person is acting out or whatever. What was the first part of that again?
Do you know, I was busy moving things about here, and I've lost the first part of the question.
The first part of the question, I think, was, again, I think the answer part of it about being trauma responsive thinks you're just giving them, it's fine, they've got trauma, just let them off with, but it's not. It's about understanding and coming in a more trauma-informed responsive.
How would you respond when people say that a trauma-informed response allows the child to avoid the consequences of their behaviour?
But the thing is, I would go back to the avoid. They're actually not avoiding the consequences. There has to be consequences. There has to be boundaries. But it's how you put these boundaries in place. How many times have we seen pupils being excluded and they're coming back in again, and then you exclude them, they come back in again, and you're not really getting to the root causes and conditions of why you're excluding them all the time? You need to start looking somewhere.
It's funny because I used to have this conversation with my mum all the time about I was never dealing with things in the right way from her point of view, because my consequence didn't look like her traditional consequence, but there was always a follow through, and maybe consequence is not quite the right word, but there was always a discussion and there was always a learning and there was always a something that happened, but it wasn't punitive. It was all with that focus on moving forward.
It's like the quote, maybe people might say, hey, I want to come in and speak to you. I'm going to be brutally honest with you. Brutal's not the right word, because that's not the word we're using. Right, I'm going to be honest with you here. Right, here's what's happening. It's no bit, right, I'm going to be brutally honest with you here. The brutally doesn't need to come into it. It's just about being honest with him and showing a more compassionate and understanding response and how we can move on. Again, it's a perfect example of seeing a repair after a rupture.
Yep. And that's a really important part, isn't it, of repairing. You have to have that rupture in order to be able to repair and to move forward.
Mm-hmm.
So here's another question for you. Can the things you've spoken about still have an effect even when the young person is continually in the situation that's causing trauma?
See that again?
Can the things you've spoken about still have an effect and an impact for the person, even when that young person is still in the situation that's causing trauma?
Right, yeah, I get that, what you're saying there. I actually had it before. What generally happens, and that's again, if you look at, we need to reform the environments where these young people are raised. That's so important, and that's why I'm looking at this program I'm thinking about, because what can happen is you've got a young person, I've seen it myself, a young person's coming into school dysregulated and with the chaos at home, and you're more or less resetting them, getting them organised and ready for the day, and then they're coming back home again and into the environment with just chaos and unpredictability, and then they're coming back in again and you're resetting them again. And that can be difficult to manage. You might have the other situation where, and we've had it before regarding either nurture groups or whatever, that unfortunately some young people are just too emotionally damaged for mainstream education, and then for their own benefit you maybe need to find alternative forms of education for them, whether it's smaller schools, things that's more appropriate for their condition. So unfortunately some pupils can be that emotionally damaged where we need to find alternative arrangements for them. There's no without I want to try and your best for them.
So that's firing off all sorts of things in my head about the different school environments that are out there, and how perhaps there could be a wider variety of environments for our children. So we've got mainstream environments, and we've got special school environments, and we've got a tiny little bit of what's in between.
Yeah,
and maybe as a system we could be looking at expanding.
Well, in Western Bartonshire, but probably maybe some people on here for Western Bartonshire, you've got mainstream education schools, obviously, like Clydebank High, Vale Academy, the Barton Academy, and then we've got Choices. And then we've got another place called, I think it's called Ardfern. I think that's the other places there, and that's alternative accommodations.
So there are things that are out there.
Yeah.
That question that we've just answered fired off one that somebody had put into the chat earlier on, which was about the difference between chronic and extreme neglect. I think you'd mentioned, and I was in the process of trying to frame an answer when my answer popped into the chat and I wasn't finished. And it was really a question for you. What's the difference between chronic and extreme neglect? Or is there a difference?
They probably come under the same banner, chronic and extreme. Both of them come under the prolonged category of trauma. Chronic and extreme, they more or less come under the same umbrella.
Okay, thank you. And another question, which might well be our last question in the chat. Have you got any tips or techniques when working with neurodivergent learners who present with ACEs? So particularly children with ADHD or autistic learners, and the assimilation of information or mindfulness can be a challenge, especially with visualizations.
Yeah, it can be quite difficult. I don't work with, did you say kids with autism?
With ADHD and autistic learners.
ADHD, we don't want to get down the road of ADHD and then the crossover and all these sort of things. If we're just going to be sticking strictly to kids with ADHD, it can be quite difficult to manage regarding mindfulness and things. Again, some of the sessions might suit them, some don't. It just depends what you're kind of doing. I'm thinking about the lighter mindfulness breathe, it's called. Kids with ADHD might adapt to that one not too badly, but the more intense 10-week program, which are more deeper into practices, they might struggle. I think it's just finding the right thing for them.
I'm sorry, I've just realised, Gerry, there's questions in the chat as well that maybe I'd missed.
Right.
And you've touched on one of this with one of the stories that you had actually, which I found really inspiring for myself. And the question here is, how do you get pupils into school if they are low attenders due to anxiety?
I'll quickly kind of, that's what I spent a wee bit of 5 minutes on that.
You did, yeah.
Again, having a place in school where they can come into. My nurture room is ideal for that. So the young person who I was talking about, they spent a bit of time with me in the nurture room in the morning. And again, then we started to kind of build relationship. So the young person used to come in with me and I would make them toast and tea. Mm-hmm. Toast and tea, and that's now become a regular. And then we'll be building the relationship up from there. Obviously, I knew a wee bit about the history of adversity, which gave me a wee bit of an inkling and an idea of what interventions I would need to put in place. Again, that was a lot about the gradual exposure, a lot about scaffolding experiences, what the young person needed from me and what the young person needed from that classroom environment. So that was finding out a lot about what's comfortable for that young person in the class. Is it sitting next to a door? Is it sitting at the back? Probably they're not sitting at the front because you think everybody's looking at them. And then what would be best for them in the classroom regarding communicating with the teacher? Like this young girl or young person, young boy didn't want called out. If they get called out in class to ask a question, they would maybe left and you would never have seen them again. So that's about gradual exposure, getting them comfortable with their surroundings, seeing what they're needing. What does young person need? Again, scaffold these experiences. It's a slow process, but again, as somebody just said there, I'm dealing with this situation where I had a young person at 29% attendance, and the proper intervention, the proper relationships, the proper scaffolding experiences, and trauma informed about their issues, and putting in trauma responsive interventions. This young person's now come up for, there'll be 90% probably next week, 90% attendance, attending most classes.
It's a phenomenal response. And I think you're right. It's about being able to unpick for the child what the difficulties are, and work with what they're telling us, and make the adjustments that they need to make it accessible. Now, Gerry, there are some questions that we haven't answered, but maybe they're questions that we can come back to at a later time, if that's okay, because I am aware of time. It is marching on. Now I've lost my piece of paper where I'd written things down on. What I'll do is I will send some links out for people to follow up on. And one of those things would be just to flag up that we do have another couple of events left in our Adoption Week Scotland. So we have a legal question and answer session tomorrow, which would be a really interesting session for anybody to come along to. And we also have a life story session on Friday for people if they want to come along to that. And I can put little links in the chat there, and also links to some of the resources that we have education-wise, and some of the things that you've said as well, Gerry, that I can kind of follow up on.
Yeah.
Is there any...
Sorry, Paula, can I just come in there? Sorry, the therapeutic life story work is tomorrow night, in actual fact.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, yes, my piece of paper has just floated away from me.
That's okay.
There. So there are still some events, and I'll send those out to you to have a little look at. Gerry, is there anything else that you wanted to mention before we finish for the evening?
No, as I said, just thanks for inviting me back on again, and for the tremendous response we had from everybody that signed up to the webinar tonight. And I say my Twitter handle I put on at the start, and again it's at Gerry Diamond 71, and my email is gerard.diamond@ourcloud.buzz.
And we can pop that
Yeah,
and follow up as well if anybody wants to get in touch with you. There are lots of positive feedback in the chat that you'll need to have a little read through. We really appreciate you coming back and chatting to us. I think that first session that you did for me, there were a lot of people that were very disappointed because it had been set up as a meeting and they weren't able to come along. So this has been fantastic. We really appreciate it.